Okay, so before you say anything, I know that this video is kind of an unfair comparison, comparing a 1-year-old phone to a phone that was just recently released. And while the POCO X3 Pro is a year old now, it still offers insane value. The same with the Infinix Zero 5G. Plus, these two phones are the only phones that I have with me, and coincidentally are in the same price point of about 12,000 Philippine pesos here in the Philippines, or about $240 US. So if you are in the market for a new smartphone at this price point, then this video might be for you. What's up mga kuya? Welcome back to the channel. So this is my comparison video on the POCO X3 Pro versus the Infinix Zero 5G. And for the sake of this video, I'm just going to be calling the POCO X3 Pro the X3, of course not to be confused with the regular POCO X3 NFC and the Infinix Zero 5G as Zero. And as some of you know, the X3 has been my main phone for a year now. So how does it compare to a phone that was just recently released at the same price point? Well, it is kind of close, and as not to waste your time, if you're currently looking for a smartphone with 5G at this price point, then just buy the Zero right now, as the X3 doesn't have 5G. Okay, so just a quick spec comparison of these two phones. Okay, so first off, in terms of build quality and design, so right off the bat, these two phones are pretty much the same in terms of build quality. So you both have plastic backs, plastic frames, and glass fronts. Although with the X3, you actually get a Corning Gorilla Glass 6, as with the Zero. Infinix didn't really specify like what's the glass covering this, so I assumed in my review video that this is just Corning Gorilla Glass 5. But in terms of design, the design of the Zero is definitely way better for me, as it looks more elegant. And even though the X3 does have like a cool design with this two-tone finish of glossy finish here at the middle part and a matte finish here at the sides, the camera bump of the Zero is what really wins me over. That's just freaking sexy, as you know from my review video of this. Plus, the camera bump here on the X3 just sticks out more, which is, well, it doesn't look all that good compared to the Zero. And in terms of design here at the back, of course, you have the huge POCO branding here on the X3, and then a small Infinix 5G here on the lower left part of the Zero. On the right side of both these phones, you have a flat power button / fingerprint scanner, and then the volume rockers. And comparing the fingerprint scanner of both these phones, the Infinix Zero 5G has a way faster and more accurate fingerprint scanner, and the bonus here is if you're a sweaty person, yes, pasmado akong tao, is if your fingers are just a bit sweaty or wet, then the Zero can still easily detect it. As compared to the X3, if your fingers are just a bit wet, then it will have a hard time in reading your fingers. And on the left side of both these phones are the SIM card trays. And the bonus here for the Zero is that you actually can put 2 SIM cards and then a single micro SD card, as compared with the X3 is that you only get to have 2 nano SIMs or 1 nano SIM and a micro SD card. And at the top of these phones are your secondary noise cancelling microphones, but here on the X3 you actually get an IR blaster plus a small hole here for which works with the earpiece speaker grill as the secondary front-facing speakers. And no, you don't have dual stereo speakers here on the Zero. And at the bottom of these phones are the 3.5mm headphone jack, main microphone, USB Type-C port, and bottom firing speaker. And another thing regarding water resistance, so the X3 does have an IP53 rating, so you can use this in the rain or in the shower. But here on the Zero, you actually don't have any IP certification or any water resistance claims by Infinix. And to take note that the Zero is slightly taller compared to the X3, as this has a slightly larger 6.78-inch display as compared to the 6.67-inch here on the X3. So first category, build quality and design, I'm giving it to the Zero, as this has a way sexier back, and I would say a more mature design. And moving on to display, so both of these phones have IPS LCD displays, 1080p, both 120Hz, but the Zero actually has a slight advantage of a 6.78-inch display as compared to the 6.67-inch here on the X3. So both of these have great displays for mid-range smartphones, but I'm actually giving the slight edge here on the X3 as this does have slightly more neutral colors, a brighter display with significantly better sunlight readability, and just overall the display on the X3 is just more pleasant to look at compared to the Zero. Plus color shift at extreme angles is slightly less noticeable here on the X3, so regarding the display, for me, the X3 definitely wins here. And moving on to the cameras on both these phones. So you get 48 megapixel main sensors on both these phones, but the X3 has a quad camera setup as compared to the triple camera setup here on the Zero. Plus you have an 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor here on the X3, 2 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. As compared here on the Zero, you have a 13 megapixel telephoto lens and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. And I'm gonna say it right now, the clear winner here is the X3. Not just because it has more sensors, the keywords being color and dynamic range. So here on the X3, you get more pleasant colors for me, which are better and more consistent and better dynamic range. And again, that ultra-wide lens on the X3 is, in my opinion, more helpful compared to a telephoto lens on the Zero. But when it comes to the front-facing camera of these phones, you have a 20 megapixel sensor here on the X3 and a 16 megapixel sensor here on the Zero. So for all you selfie takers out there and those who like to vlog, I'm actually recommending the Zero here as compared to the X3. Okay, so this is the vlog test for the X3 versus the Zero, and what you're hearing right now is from the main microphone of the X3, and what you're hearing right now is from the microphone of the Zero. And do take note that both of these are recording at 1080p 30 fps since the X3 can't record at 4K. And something to take note is that you actually get a wider lens here on the front-facing camera on the Zero. So aside from having a wider angle lens here on the Zero, you actually have a front-facing flash. And also, I forgot to mention in design that both these phones have a hole punch for the front-facing camera. Although you do get a significantly smaller hole punch here on the X3. And now moving on to performance on both these phones. So again, the X3 has a Snapdragon 860, the Zero has a MediaTek Dimensity 900, so this has 5G again, the X3 doesn't, but both these phones have UFS 3.1 storage. But here on the Zero, you actually have DDR5 memory as compared to just DDR4 here on the X3. The X3 running on MIUI 13 based on Android 12, and the Zero running on XOS 10 based on Android 11. And this is kind of surprising. So while technically the X3 Pro has more horsepower, the Zero has overall better performance because of the software. Like, it's a significantly more fluid experience here on the Zero as compared to the X3, which is really noticeable when switching between apps. So here on the X3, if you have multiple apps open in the background and you're switching between those apps, then you'll notice micro stutters, which are quite frequent here. So the key thing here is optimization. XOS here on the Zero is way more optimized compared to MIUI here on the X3, and just simply browsing through the UI, opening, closing apps, and switching between apps is definitely smoother here on the Zero. And it is important to take note that I'm using the base version of the X3, which has 6 gigs of memory with 128 gigs of storage, and the Zero has 8 gigs of memory with 128 gigs of storage. But I feel like that's not really the issue here on the X3, with it having just 6 gigs of memory. For me, in my opinion, 6 gigs of memory is enough for a mid-range smartphone, so I'm not blaming the lack of memory here on the X3. I'm blaming it on MIUI 13. But like I mentioned earlier, in terms of raw performance, then the X3 is definitely the winner here. So I'm just gonna show you guys a quick gameplay comparison of both these phones on Genshin Impact. Okay, so both of these are running Genshin Impact at the highest settings at 60 FPS with motion blur turned off. And this is what I mean to say that the X3 has better raw performance. So just simply running around, you'll notice that the X3 Pro doesn't really stutter at all. But here on the Zero, again at the highest settings, you're gonna experience frequent stutters, nothing too major that would take away a great gaming experience. But if you want a really smooth experience here on Genshin Impact on the Zero, then you're gonna have to play at high settings. And it is important to take note that the X3 does heat up quite a bit more as compared to the Zero. So I mentioned in my review that the Zero doesn't really overheat at all, while here on the X3 it does heat up quite a bit, but not to the point that it would be uncomfortable for you to hold. So regarding performance on these two phones, I'm actually giving the edge to the Zero, mainly because it's a more fluid experience just overall. Again, browsing for the UI, opening, closing apps, and switching between apps, while the X3 does have a more powerful chipset, which in reality will benefit gamers. So if you're more of a gamer or you're someone who doesn't really use multiple apps at once, then the slight edge here is on the X3. But again, for me, overall performance, I'm gonna give it to the Zero. And lastly is battery life on these phones. So both of these have 5000 mAh batteries. Both of them have 33 watts of fast charging. And as long as you're not using 5G here on the Zero, then you'll actually get the same battery life on these phones, so about 6 to 6.5 hours of screen on time, with about 30% left by the end of the day, and that's with my medium to heavy use of social media, watching videos, some gaming, and picture taking. And both of these phones charge from 0 to 100 in just a little over 1 hour. So 1 hour and 10 minutes here on the X3, while 1 hour and 15 minutes here on the Zero. And if you're gonna ask me personally, which of these phones I'd rather choose over the other, which of these phones I'd use as my daily driver, then my answer is the POCO X3 Pro all day. And to be honest, the one thing that won me over for the X3 Pro are the speakers. And this is not just because the X3 has dual stereo speakers while the Zero only has a bottom firing speaker. It's because of the sound quality. Like I mentioned in my review of the Zero, this is tunog lata, while here you get booming speakers, you get to hear the mids, highs, and lows. And I know that this speaker test won't really do the speakers on the X3 justice, but here you go anyway. So first up are the speakers on the Zero. And here are the speakers on the X3. And ever since I've been spoiled by the speakers of the Redmi Note 10 Pro, the X3 Pro, and the Tecno Command 17 Pro, I can't really go back to this. And compared to other phones that I've used in the past with mono speakers, then the Zero definitely has the worst speaker of them all. So a quick recap: better design here on the Zero, better display here on the X3, a significantly better main camera system here on the X3, although you do have a better selfie camera here on the Zero. Overall performance, again, I'm giving it to the Zero, but the X3 just has better raw performance. So again, to all you mobile gamers out there, the X3 might be the better choice for you. The Zero has 5G, the X3 doesn't. And in terms of battery life, both of these are pretty much the same. But yeah, hopefully this video helps you guys out in choosing your next mid-range smartphone. You know, if you can find stocks of these online, so it's almost impossible to find both of these available online. Although I do see units of these available at malls and physical stores. So yeah, that's gonna do it for my comparison of the POCO X3 Pro and Infinix Zero 5G. As always, leaving a like is the easiest way to support the channel. Consider subscribing if you like my content, and turn on notifications for all so you'll be updated on my latest videos. Stay safe mga kuya, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Flip a bag, now I'm serving a Tesla. Going back, shawty with me, I stepped up. GTA for the ops, ain't no less stuff. Shawty born to be my angel, yeah, I'm blessed up. Cooking right up in the stew, got a